So how do we now handle the submission of this form so that we can then close the dialog and add this data to the tasks array? Well, the way HTML works is such that if you have a submit button in a form, as it's the case here, that button, when pressed, will automatically submit the form, and the browser will then try to send a request with that form data to the server that served the website. Now, that's a problem here because that would be our development server, which is not configured to take incoming data requests that want to submit data. We don't support that here. This server really only exists to serve the index.html file. Therefore, we want to prevent that browser default. We want to make sure that no such request is sent so that we can instead handle the submission in JavaScript on the client side. And preventing this browser default behavior of creating and sending that request is pretty simple when using Angular, because it will actually automatically be prevented for you if you're importing that forms module, which we did add to the imports to unlock ngModel. Because this forms module, inside of it, includes a component built by the Angular team, which uses the form element, the standard form element tag, as a selector, and which therefore takes control of this form under the hood automatically, simply by importing this forms module. And this form component, which took control of this form here, will automatically listen to the submission of the form and then prevent that browser default when that submission occurs. So therefore, you technically don't need to do anything to prevent that default. Now, of course, we want to be notified when such a submission occurs, though, and we want to run our own code when it happens. And therefore, this forms module, which took control of this form element, also gives you a special event that will be emitted. The ngSubmit event, to which you can listen on this form element, which will occur when that form submission happened and that browser default was prevented. And you can then run your own code in response to this ngSubmit event. So therefore, by simply setting up event binding to ngSubmit and then running any code of your choice, you will be able to handle this form submission on your own in your Angular code. And for that, I'll add a new method here. OnSubmit sounds like a fitting name. And I'll bind this to the ngSubmit event like this. Now, since we have that two-way binding, which populates entered title, entered summary, and entered date, we can use these properties in OnSubmit to construct a new task or do whatever we want to do. And what I want to do here is let the tasks component, which manages all my tasks, know about that new task data that has been submitted, so that we can add a new task there to this tasks array, and so that we can close the dialog by setting this is adding task to false. So in the new task component, we want to emit another new event here, the add event, for example. As always, this name is up to you, but it should describe the event that's occurring. And we create a new event emitter object for that, but this time we will be submitting some data. And the data I want to submit here is an object, since I want to submit the title, summary, and date. So it should be an object that has a title key, which will hold a value of type string, a summary key, which will hold a value of type string, and a date key, which will hold a value of type string. And then here in onSubmit, we use this add property to emit a new event. And we pass our object to emit, and that object now must have a title property because of this generic type we added here, and that is why we are adding it, so that we do add the proper type down here when we emit. And the title is, of course, this entered title. The summary is this entered summary, and the date is this entered date. Like this. That's the finished code here in the new task component class. Now we can go to the tasks component template, and there on this new task component instance, we can listen to this add event. And then trigger a new method in the tasks component class, which we can call onAddTask, for example. And here, of course, I expect to get my task data, which again should be an object that has that shape I described in my new task component TS file. And now, since I need the same type definition in multiple files, I actually want to outsource it again. And we could outsource it here in a new task.model.ts file, or we could merge it into the existing task model TS file. That is up to you, and I'll go for this approach where I merge it. So here I export another interface. I'll name it new task data. That sounds like a fitting name. And then I have my object definition here. Now in the new task component TypeScript file, instead of defining this object type inline like this, I'll use this new task data type, which must be imported from this task model file. And again, we can add this type annotation here. And we can now do the same in the tasks component file. There, the task data we receive in this method should be of that shape. So it should be that new task data type. And therefore, of course, we also must import this type here in this component file. We can also add the type annotation here. With that, we know that we'll get such a task here, and therefore we can then edit our tasks array and push a new task onto it. Now, this tasks array holds tasks that have this shape, an ID, and then title, summary, due date, and a user ID. So therefore, the new task we want to add here should have that same shape. And actually, TypeScript thankfully forces us to have that shape here. So I'll add an ID property here, and I want to generate a new ID here. So for simplicity reasons, I'll simply use the current date, get the time in milliseconds, and then convert this to a string. It's not a perfectly unique ID. We could generate two tasks at exactly the same point of time, but it's definitely good enough for this demo. And I'll also set the other fields. The title can be set to taskdata.title, the summary should be set to taskdata.summary, and the due date should be set to taskdata.date. But of course, then we also need that user ID here. And that user ID is thankfully something which we have here because of this input. So we have that user ID property, which holds the ID of the currently selected user. So therefore, user ID is simply equal to this.userID. And that should therefore then add a new task. By the way, if you would want to add it at the beginning of the array, you could add the unshift method, which is built into JavaScript instead of push. Now with that, we're almost there, but not quite. We also want to set isAddingTask to false so that we close the dialog. And in the tasks component template file, we of course have to set this add event, which is emitted by the new task component, to this newly added onAddTask method and forward that emitted event data. And with that all done, if we now save everything, we can give this a try and enter some new data like this, pick a date, and if I click create, the dialog closes and my task shows up here, and only for that user, not for any other user. So that's working as it should. We can also complete this task, and that's all looking good therefore. And hence, we're almost done with this application, but there still are a couple of improvements I want to implement together with you.